I don't want you guys to show up and freak out when you see a
Thick
a
stack.
file that big. Hey everybody, welcome to our final episode number 9 of Buying Your Home. My name is Joe Maez with the Maez Group, along with
Amar Neshwa, Frost Mortgage Lending Group. Welcome back, folks.
It's been a cool series, the 9-part series of Buying Your Home. Last week we talked about the week of closing, getting ready for closing. We scheduled your closing. We talked about a lot of stuff. But now we're actually going to closing. So it's a happy day. This is supposed to be an awesome experience. And you've been leading up to it for maybe 60 days, right? 30, 45, 60 days in this market. And so it's been quite a journey. So let's talk about the do's and don'ts of going to closing. Okay, so you've scheduled a closing. Takes more or less an hour of your time. Normally, closing times are scheduled for about an hour, okay, depending on the situation. And a lot of times people ask, hey, am I going to have to sit? You're buying the house, and who knows how your transaction was with the seller. Sometimes it's nice and smooth. Sometimes it's a little contentious, something, what happens? Do I have to close with the seller? Am I going to be sitting, I said all those things,
Yeah.
Am I sitting in the same room as a seller? And I will tell you that in the state of New Mexico, at least the way we do business here, you're not. You will actually have 2 separate closings. So the seller will close at their hour, you'll close in your hour. Okay, so maybe you've scheduled, we're going to talk to you about maybe some things and how to schedule your closing and setting some expectations, because closings can make all the difference as to when you schedule that closing. Let's talk about a common question people ask. When will I get my keys?
That's the
when am I going to get my keys? And, like any good, professional, I'm going to say it depends. And when I say it depends, here's why it does, okay? Normally, and it just depends on when you close, if you're closing on a Friday afternoon, okay? And remember, there's 2 closings. There's a buyer's closing and there's a seller's closing, okay? And if you're closing on a Friday afternoon, I'm here to tell you that the chances of you getting your keys are next to nothing. Is that
absolutely slim to none on that case?
Because there's some things that have to happen, guys, and we're going to talk about that. So if you're looking for keys the same day, probably one of the best practices to schedule to where the seller and the buyer are both closing in the morning before 11 o'clock.
Yep.
That's
accurate?
That pretty fair to say?
That's very accurate. Yeah.
All right.
Say so.
Because there's some things that need to happen in order for you to get those keys. And most of the time, the way the contract's written up will dictate that. But closing and keys possession takes place upon funding and recording. Well, there's some that's not open over the weekend, and that's the county where you're going to record. And banks are not open on the weekend either. So keep that in mind. Now, here's something. Let's go back to the closing table. We want you guys to know some things that you probably want to know is where and when. That's important. Okay, and you've received emails throughout the process. I know that if you're doing business with myself and Amar, you know where the closing company's at. You know where the title company's at. In fact, maybe you dropped off your earnest money there the first week of closing. That's going to be the place that you're going to close, unless there's been some extenuating circumstances. Okay, so you're going to be given an hour. How important is it for people to show up during that hour?
Super important to be there on time.
Early, maybe.
And possibly a little bit early, just so you're diligent, ready to go, you know what to expect, and you have all of your items in hand that are necessary for the closing.
Right. And so we've seen a lot of people, guys, and I don't be that person that shows up 30 minutes late to a closing, because you know what the title company may do is they may say, we can't close you today. And then everything that you had planned, and there's a reason, they have other people that they're closing that same day. So do your best to show up early for that closing. And who needs to show up for closing?
So you always want the main borrower on the loan at closing. If there's a co-borrower on the loan, they also need to be there as well, or a co-signer, and anybody else that you want to celebrate with. But with COVID and everything, they're limiting that.
It's been a little bit different. Okay, so the importance of getting there early, and then also being flexible too, because there may have been somebody that was right before you that showed up 30 minutes late. And so that may push your closing a little bit if the title company is forgiving that way.
Yes.
So some things that you need to bring to closing, guys, and we're going to tell you, because and again, this is to save you time, money, and definitely create a better experience for you. What are some items that the buyer needs to bring to closing tomorrow?
So you always want to bring your unexpired government issued identification. That's very important. We've had people that didn't notice that it expired right before closing, or
So a driver's license,
passport, that will work for closing. You also want to bring your cashier's check if you decide to go that route on
Wait
your
a
cash
minute.
to close.
Can I bring a personal check?
I would say no.
The answer is absolutely
not. I don't agree with that. You definitely want to go to the bank and order your cashier's check. We do have some instances where a person doesn't have a bank, they have an online bank account, and in those cases you're going to have to submit for a wire transfer to the title company. And with all the wire fraud happening these days, you definitely want to be sure that you get on the phone with the title company and get the exact wiring instructions the way they state them to you, just so that wire is completed in a timely manner. Typically, you like to do that the day before closing.
Correct. Again, guys, this is about us trying to get you the keys the same day of closing, right?
Yes.
And so try to get you possession that same day. So that way all your plans that you made for after closing can happen without a hitch. So, and we talked about the cashier's check and the wire. Those are for your down payment, and that figure would have come to you by way of Amar or whoever you're using for your lending. Hopefully Amar. All right. So that's important, right? So you
Yes.
have those documents. What else could the buyer need to bring to closing?
So definitely you want to bring yourself and your family if you want to celebrate and take pictures afterwards, because a lot of people love that day for celebration. So you want to make it a memorable moment. You don't want it to be stressful whatsoever. So you want to be prepared and you want to be on time. That's my important take on the whole thing.
So guys, it may not take an hour to close. It may take an hour to close depending on how many questions you have. What can people be prepared for with the different types of loans that are out there? How big is the package? Because a lot of times people show up and they're thinking, hey, it's no big deal. We're just going to go in there and sign a couple of documents. But let's set some expectations as to, I don't want you guys to show up and freak out when you see a file that big. So tell people about that.
So the thickest files that we tend to see are on the first-time buyer loans, on an MFA, first and second mortgage. So you'll have pretty much double the size. You're going to be signing everything twice via the first mortgage and the second mortgage. And that could take up to the whole entire hour needed. So you definitely want to be sure that you have that time blocked out for work or anything else, just so you're prepared for that full hour of signing. And in some cases, it may go by in 15 minutes, to be honest.
Well, and you're not alone. You're not just looking at this stuff by yourself. There's actually going to be an escrow officer that's there, that's trained to explain these documents to you. Your broker could be there. Your realtor can be there. Sometimes we're there, sometimes we're not, just depending. But really, for the most part, if I go to closing, I'll just sit there cracking jokes and it'll end up taking 2 hours. But really, it's the escrow officer's show. And
Absolutely.
Sometimes Amar will show up to a closing just depending on the situation, if somebody needs some extra explanation. But really, it's between you, the buyer, and the escrow officer. And they're going to be going over all the documents just to let you know how things work and explain every document to you.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
The first thing they're going to go over is the closing statement, and that's going to break down all the costs. And for the first timer, it may be a little bit confusing, right? But you're actually given this document. You should be given this document a day in advance, maybe 2 days in advance, depending on how things go. Sometimes you may show up to closing, and that may be the first time you see it, just because of the way things happen in our business.
Yes.
Okay.
So another thing that we do as a local lender with Frost Mortgage is we offer to send you initial closing documents through email. We call these Snap Docs, and Snap Docs is a new method of closing, and it's advanced technology. It speeds up your closings 50% or more. So on a 45-minute closing, it could take 20 minutes if you go ahead and use Snap Docs. to e-sign the majority of your closing docs that don't require a notary.
So that brings up a really good point. Let's just say, for instance, you agreed at the time of contract, when you first got under contract, you agreed to a closing on a certain date. Well, come to find out, some kind of family emergency, or there was a vacation that you had planned during that same time that you didn't have in your calendar, and you're like, oh my goodness, I can't reschedule this vacation. I had this vacation planned, but I don't want to move closing because I know that the seller said that if I don't close on that date, there's no deal. People can close remotely.
That's a huge advantage.
Right, and that's one thing that we can facilitate for you at the Mayas Group, along with our title company connections, is we can actually do what's called a mail out. And the package for closing will be mailed out to you at your desk, wherever you're at, your location where you're at. And there will be a notary on site that will explain the documents to you. And then the documents will be emailed back and FedEx back to the title company in time for closing.
Yeah, we've had people close in other states and everything worked out just fine. There may be an extra day where it needs to fund and record and receive the original documents, but you're well prepared for that since you are out of state on vacation enjoying the beach.
Exactly. So there's a lot of things, and that's why you trust in professionals to help you out with this. And that's where you being as honest as possible from the beginning will help the professionals help you. All right. So we both seller and buyer closed in the morning, right? When would we possibly get keys if everything goes perfectly?
In a perfect world, you get them that afternoon.
Yeah, 3-4 o'clock. They'll be calling you from the title company because keys are only released upon funding and the recording of the property. Okay, and recording means the new title has been recorded. Now you're actually the owner of record. Okay, so that's important for you guys to know too.
Yes.
Now, if I'm the buyer and I close in the morning and the seller closes at 4:30 that afternoon,
there's not going to be a huge chance that it will work out.
Chances are you're going to get your keys
if it's
a next business day, probably by about 11:30 or 12.
Yeah.
The next business day. So these are things that a lot of people won't tell you, that we wanted you guys to know. All right, and create an even better closing experience and buying process for you. All right.
Absolutely.
So guys, you guys are more than free to ask us any other questions along the way. If there's other questions that came up as a result of this and you want to reach out to us individually, you can always, our contact information is on all of these podcasts that you're able to access and reach out to us personally, because that's what we do. And we will respond to you personally. So we started the journey from the very, very beginning of doing the right thing and getting pre-qualified. We took you through the first week of escrow, right? We set up inspections. We walked you through that. We walked you through the objections and waivers. We walked you through getting pre-qualified.
The appraisal process. And the surveys.
And getting repairs done. We walked you through the week of closing, just all kinds of stuff. It's been quite a journey. And I hope you guys got a lot out of it, because we had a lot of fun doing it, didn't we not?
We sure did.
And so thank you for joining us for our 9-part series. We're going to have other series, so be sure to subscribe to our channel here and hit like and share it with other people, because there's a lot of part of our life is, I want people to do their research because it makes for a better experience.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, we're all just here to share and help one another do things better. So thank you from Joe Mayas at the Mayas Group. And
thank you, folks. Amar Neshwa, Frost Mortgage.
we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.